Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Dr. Nathan Goodyear here. Welcome to another Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear podcast. This is a new series that I've entitled called Soil to Soul. Now you go, what does this got to do with cancer and healing people and patients? Well, my guest today, I think, is going to really be able to help us. And that's what this series too is going to be able to, I think, describe to us is the relationship we have as individuals in our environment, not just the relationship, because we're a byproduct of our environment, but also our responsibility to it. My first series, my first interview here was a two-part series with the author and the host of Farm Hero on YouTube. Check out that series because season 2 will be coming soon. Her name is Laura Zaspa. I encourage you to check that out and share it. And in that, what we're looking for here is the content of the soil actually seeds our soul, our bodies, for healing or for disease. And so we shouldn't be surprised that today what we're seeing is disease, because what I would say is we're not getting the full capacity of the healing from our soil. And in her opening line, she says, it's time to meet the pioneers transforming farming and food. And I would add healing and medicine. You're going to really love our guest here. His name is Dr. Yadi Wang. It's going to take me a moment to go through his CV, but I'm going to do that because you need to understand his background because it's extensive and his expertise is going to really wow you. I first met him at an event that Naisha Winters had. And you know me, I love Naisha Winters. She's a good friend of mine. So anybody she recommends is somebody I've got to meet. So I met him there. On his LinkedIn page, he describes himself as a farmer, a father, a regenerative farmer, a food sovereignty, and then expert in carbon cycle and water cycle. He's the co-founder, president, board of director of development of Regenerative Yields Marketing Association Cooperative. He's a contract general manager, operator, farmer of Oatman Farms Ranch, and that's LLC. That's in Arizona. You got to check out their website. Technical advisor, consultant, Oat Farms LLC, founder, land steward, Vertical Resolutions LLC, research associate, scientist. He is a core scientist. Landscape Evolution Observatory Project of Biosphere 2, if you remember back in the late 1990s into 2000. He is selected for many areas of leadership and community services. He is instrumental in really, I believe, connecting people back to their local group, to their local environment, and then seeding it out from there. He has written book chapters, publications in peer-reviewed journals. He's a speaker. He's been highlighted in documentaries, and we could go on and on and on. In fact, I think we could probably do a podcast on his accolades and accomplishments. Yadi, it is so great to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. Nathan. And I've been, since our last conversation, I've been eager to explore and have this type of dialogue more. I think when we think about what doctors do to save human life, essentially, or help humans to prevent chronic illness and diseases, and I think that's very respectful. And equally, I think from current standard point and from some of the hot topic when we think about food is medicine. Now we put an equal sign right there between food and medicine. And that really connect, I think, is a perfect timing for us as producers, as well as doctors to connect together is how do we actually describe that? Not just to define it, but how do we actually embrace that as a tool for human health and also for ecological health as a whole, essentially the health for life. Um, yeah, so
That's poetry. I mean, from a nerdy perspective, that's poetry. Because what I hear you saying is that because we shouldn't be surprised that we're dealing with such, epidemics of disease, because in a way we're just a byproduct of the environment that we help to create, right? I mean, is that because if you say, food is medicine, that's a quote that's attributed to Hippocrates, considered the father of Western medicine. Then I guess you could flip that and say, well, if food is medicine, then food could be not medicine and it could destroy, or it could lead to disease and the need for intervention. So it's the pathway to health or it's the pathway to disease.
Yeah, I think it's really how we look at it and whether we want to embrace the culture and value from the traditional point of view, or we only embrace innovation and technology that is
Mm.
isolated to the variables that we are interested. So I think it's as broad as it can be, but as little as very narrow as it can be. I think it's very complex when we look at the nature, when we look at the human metabolic system. And there is a common part is these are complex structures, complex system. And when we think about decoupling, when we think about isolating variable, and we're only talking about a point of contact rather than looking at it from a system perspective. A little background is when I first introduced to farming was 2015, 2015, and really born and raised as a Chinese, and agriculture has been in our culture for so long. And my extended family sometimes joke it has to take him across the ocean to realize agriculture is in his core value, and that takes time and that takes some transition. And when I first introduced agriculture in 2015, my father-in-law was the sixth generation, and that's what draw me into this arena with my background in chemical and process engineer. Of course, when you see tire sizes are taller than you, and you get excited. You get excited about the mechanic. You get excited about the hydraulic hose and bigger than your neck, right? So that was my first impression, and draw into that mechanized agriculture for 2,500 acres, for people to manage that, and growing very much precision agriculture from that standpoint. Um, but soon I realized with my practice in science, particularly in fundamental science of the Earth system, and it's a heterogeneous environment. And I start asking myself, what is the connection? If we only focus on precision, how can we address other parts? Um, by that time, I wasn't even aware of a term called regenerative agriculture. I was my post scientific research career. I had opportunity to meet Dax Henson, who is the founder and owner of Oatman Flats Ranch, where I contract farm, help manage the farm and its food business company as well. And he introduced the term for regenerative agriculture to me in the arid environment. I didn't think that much, but I came back home as a researcher. Of course, you know that is the first thing is I start digging on the internet, start searching for word. What does that mean? Um, and it was actually after I start practicing it a little later on that six principles of regenerative agriculture has been uh, either we call that defined or described, right?
What are those?
So the first one, which I think is one of the most important, is the context. You got to understand where you are, what you grow, and what's your environmental condition, soil condition, ecological setting, native to the invasive, and what is the historical climate change, or the adaptation that the system is taking. And then within that six principle, when you understand the context, the other five is minimize soil disturbance. In my understanding at this point is the physical, chemical, biological disturbance. How do we minimize that? Not to entirely eliminate, but have to reduce the risk of that to impact to the land. And biodiversity, that's very self-explanatory. Soil armor, oftentimes people talk about cover crop or biomass residue on the surface to protect soil erosion on the surface. And living roots, right? It's a very important. I know we're going to talk a lot more of that living root part in the arid environment, which I think is a crucial part for restoring life in the ecosystem here in this very brittle environment. And integration of the livestock. And this is where I think I dive into a little bit more. And throughout my journey in the regenerative agriculture, of course, when you think about physicists, geologists, even doctor, you don't just talk them as a profession. You kind of categorize them as which profession. Like for there's in doctor, there's pediatric, there's OBGYN, there's a neurologist, and equally for regenerative farming, there are different approach. And my practice and my influence on looking at a complex system was strongly influenced by Alan Savory and the holistic management. So that's where I taking apart and looking at how animal integration in the landscape, how that mimicry of the bison migration, wildlife migration, or introducing the gray wolf in the Yellowstone National Park to reactivate the water cycle and carbon cycle. And that to me, at a foundation level, is the most comprehensive, is the most logical and rational, is based on the outcome as approach to address the issues we are at the current stage, but not digging into the future to reach that silver lining.
Wow. That is so well stated because, and this is why I was so excited for this interview, Yadi, because when I talk to patients and when I, talk in general, I talk about a natural and holistic and integrative approach to cancer care or to medicine. And people go, holistic, what does that mean? Because most people think holistic, they think natural. And part that's true, but it's the concept that, we're dealing with these, you kind of alluded to it, complex systems. And people want to look at agriculture, right? And you see that today, vegetarian, I want to do vegetables, I want to, no meat. And you can't break things down and isolate them. They have to work together, and it's only together in the benefit of the whole, honestly, in that carbon cycle that you described, that you really see that holistic process. So we like to break things down to understand them. But what we do in medicine today, and I would imagine that's why we're in some of the predicament we are in agriculture today, and you're seeking to change that, is because we never reconnect those individual parts back to the whole. We just keep them disconnected. And so we're looking at this in very similar ways, but yet in very different areas. Would you agree with that? What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great analogy. I think to compare our healthcare and our agriculture producing food, kind of side by side. And I think the first thought I have, and I always constantly think about these, what does that mean to be a steward? The steward of our own body and the steward of our landscape, our ecosystem. And I think there are two words I always connect them together. And whether we want to dictate or we want to facilitate. And how do we view ourselves as part of the equation as an interval versus we want to manage everything in a way from the owning or managing perspective. Now, being an interval, if you want to make that derivative larger, then that's considered as a leadership. And that is actually what leader does, is to facilitate, to amplify the message, to allow people to have their own expression and to have that. I call that epigenetic change. When from the nerdy perspective is people stimulate, get excited, and then to improve their own skill set and to actually utilizing those existing skill set and improve the skill set to benefit of what they can provide to other people. And when we have that network or web established, then we're talking about a community effort. And there's never been a case, in my viewpoint, is one person can change the script of the history. It can in very short period of time, and that will fall. It has been um, observed in numerous historical events, from the Roman Empire to Chinese dynasty, and there's a 20 plus different dynasty, and to have the same cycle. When you have a dictatorship, when you have a dictating mindset to say this is what I want for the system to be, then we're kind of locked into a system that we cannot advance. We cannot reach the next potential. Versus if we want to facilitate, and in ways, when I think about the land stewardship from my role on the land, um, I don't think I'm trying to fix the soil. I don't think I'm trying to actually cure the soil or in any degree. And but when we think about in the landscape, the evolving process, the most abundant source is life of all kind. It's not just human. So when I think about in that way to facilitate, and I have indirect communication, not in word, not in antenna, not in frequency, but in a logical sense to connect with other life on the cellular level, to be able to store that landscape, evolving that landscape all together. I think that's something I always see as majestic and as the one of the holistic approach take that beneficial for me to continue learning in this journey, um, and to evolving within it.
Well, apparently, I need to add philosopher to your list of accolades here because, obviously, you're agriculture celebrity, builder, author, business entrepreneur, farmer. I mean, you really and you're working at strengthening communities, but you use some words there that are they're threaded throughout medicine, particularly oncology, cancer, treat, cure, and I think that's brilliant. What you said is you're facilitating the soil. And medicine, I think, has gotten away from its origin. Instead of steward, okay, I would say in medicine, we serve our patients. Okay. And so in agricultural farming, you're serving that soil, that ecosystem to facilitate its fullest potential. Now, medicine, what it said is we're going to dictate. Okay. I like your words there. It's really good. Dictate to treat and to cure. But really, what we need to do, and this is what I say, is let's help the body heal and then let the body decide how far it wants to go. I think that's a good picture of facilitation. So, really, we're facilitating in different ways that are interconnected. I mean, this is, because when you look at the oncology world, and I'll get your take on this. When patients have cancer, they go to their cancer doctor, and their cancer doctor says, it doesn't matter what you eat. You eat whatever you want because that plays no role in the development of your cancer or in the aiding of treatment of your cancer. From your perspective, where you facilitate the soil, what would be your answer to that statement by most doctors that nutrition and the food we eat plays no role in whether we have disease or not?
Well, that's a very complex question. I think um, let me try to dissect a little bit, but I think I want to add a little bit background of human society and and how we outlook for ourselves as a community, and how we outlook ourselves as the community cluster in the entire ecosystem, right? And so going back to the word, food is medicine, and it's now somehow also being politicized in a way. And we all know when we politicize things and things go into a very confined um, mode. In agriculture, that has been historically, we are confined into a industrialization, green revolution, yield in quantity is king as a philosophy, and then to hammer that price down to be able to getting uh, within that feed the world mentality with the hollowness, not with the nutrition, with the hollowness, with the quantity, with things that we easily just stuff in, and then regardless is either being absorbed or bypassed through urine or feces and pushed out from our system, and that in turn causing a lot of chronic illness and epigenetic changes in our human body, and that's as a result of how our medicine has been curing those diseases or illness occur as a complementary approach. And now, when we think about within food is medicine movement here in the US is rather new, but historically it's a indigenous practice or culture value part of many other part of the country, part of the world, right? I can't speak to a lot of other country, but being a Chinese, I've never realized the power of that until I start this journey of growing soil and growing food and growing life. Um, and really, that looking at the whole system really hold me back in to think about our traditional Chinese medicine or Oriental medicine as a whole is to consider to fix the inner pressure. Essentially, we call that qi in Chinese. And it's not about to, while you have a fever, you have sneeze or cough, let's cure that. And the doctors, traditional doctors, they always kind of check your vital on your wrist and look at your tongue and touch your cyanoids. And the next thing, they start writing a script of all the herbs that is going to be included in a package. You brew it and you drink that. And it's going to be a series of effect, multiple weeks in order to adjust you, not necessarily to ultimately heal for the kind of the part of the symptom you have, but is to adjust you to the normal level of the equilibrium. And whether that's kind of detox or whether is that to help allow you to sweat or in any regard is to reach that balance. Now coming back, thinking about food in an industrialized way, we never reach that balance. And the only balance I would take back is when we're trying to reach in the food system is to get enough supply for the demand it needs, or oversupply for the demand we have to fulfill. And oftentimes, a lot of those go into waste. Nogales, Arizona, is the largest land port of the United States. Every single year, we import 9 billion tons of the produce into the United States from Arizona, distributed to upstate Washington, New York, across the country, as long as 4,000 miles of the travel, and including part of the Canada. And 6 million tons of those were going to waste because it didn't pass the FDA inspection. Too ugly and not ripe. And so think about 6 million tons of 9 billion. That's a very small amount, less than 0.1%. But think about 6 million tons of the weight, mass, and causing greenhouse emission. And we have to have spaces to actually store those. And a lot of time they just rotten and getting bad. So if we think about oversupply and demand, that connection, and we're not really doing a service on ecological setting or in considering of the human health, because when we think about travel 4,000 miles in winterized condition, you really have to harvest things unripe. When it is unripe, that means the plant is underdeveloped, and which means this primary metabolism is barely going through a certain stage, and it cannot the plant cannot express that secondary metabolism yet in order to fulfill some of the antioxidant and certain vitamin like vitamin E and vitamin K, all those things, and into that plant for whoever is sequestering. And so coming back is that's why now we have movement in food is medicine talk about we got to source local. Local is very important because we can harvest at ripe and sell within distance and giving that nutrition to people. Now, there's a lot of debate. People say, well, local food is the best for you. You know, it depending on the practitioner who is growing the food. And for example, Yuma, Arizona is considered local, but Yuma is the largest vegetable and fruit, particular vegetable, leafy green production for the whole country. And when that dive into a conventional practice, do we still say local is better? And when the farmers that locked into a system that is still controlled by the quantity, demand, and supply, that equation that really not allow those producers to actually do better to improve their practices, but just trying to live on the cash flow, then those products are local, but those products may not give the nutritional need for everybody, may not achieve food is medicine as the goal for the outcome of human health.
So
Most
local doesn't always translate to quality, because I think you're right. And as I was sitting here, because one of the things that I think there's an opportunity right now in the United States is to really, I think, reconnect agriculture, to reconnect medicine together. Because I think if we really want to change, because I know you're a father, and I'm a father and a grandfather now. And so what happens is when you become a father, you're like you're blessed with your children, but it's different when you are blessed with a grandchild. You start to really see the generational impact. And so for me, I'm 54 years old. I'm starting to think about not just my children's generation, but my grandchildren, my great grandchildren. And I think the only way that we reconnect that quality of the nutrition. I love what you said about you're a grower of life. I love that. Um, because people go, "What? You're a grower of plants. You're working in dirt, and it's like, no, you're a grower of life. You're facilitating life, and if you don't facilitate life, then that doesn't facilitate to us people." But I think it's the connection between the two, the quality in the regenerative farming practices. And I think that then bridging with integrative medicine, I think that's where we can change generationally, one where we are facilitating disease to one where we actually facilitate wellness and really healing. And what's really interesting, your background, your family, your genetics from some of the most ancient of cultures, right? And when you look at Oatman's Farm's website, I encourage you, everybody, to go to that website. They talk about an ancient crossroads. They talk about that's where that is. But it's not just an ancient crossroads, as in, ancient groups passing there, but it's actually history, it's ancient practices, it's ancient people, it's ancient cultures that are at a crossroads with the industrialization that we have. And we don't know where that outcome's going yet. And I think you sit right there, Yadi, and you bring all of those aspects, the science, the data, but the genetic and the history and the culture background that understands that understands, I think, community more than most. And I think you give us the best opportunity at this ancient crossroads to actually see a better future. And actually, that's bearing out in the work and what is being done at Oatman Farms.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think let me address for the first part you mentioned here about nutritional value. I think while we're talking as a farmer to a physician, I think how do we relate? How do we share that message to people you're working with, your patients, or people who want to achieve a lifestyle to have a better diet, better health? I think I want to talk about a little bit plant metabolism, because when we know human metabolism is important for integrated medicine work, and that's what we're looking at, the mitochondrial health and all those things. And equally for plants, when looking at what is the vital signs of soil become healthy and our biodiversity improved, and those plants tell a story. And in terms of plant metabolism, there's two pathways: the primary metabolism and secondary metabolism. The primary metabolism of the plant is to really help on the germination, development, and the reproduction, that part of the equation. Whereas the secondary metabolism is focused on a self-defensive mechanism. So this is very important. That also kind of relate to your second part of the question, is ancient crossroad. And when I look at the plants, I see heirloom varieties have much more outstanding performance in their epigenetic changes versus bred varieties. Using wheat as an example, the heirloom varieties, they are interchanged between primary metabolism to the secondary metabolism, alter that based on its climatic condition, the stress level of each year, to achieve those natural adaptation in the most realistic way, or as an ecosystem scale. Whereas for bred varieties in wheat, and wheat is one of the hardest crop to breed, because it has 42 pairs of chromosomes, and the genetic copy you're taking out from those chromosomes is going to be very sophisticated, and to introducing into a new bred variety for its purpose. And most predominant wheat crop breeding is focusing on is quantity yield, as for trade, international trade particularly, as well as focusing on is growing in a very homogeneous condition, which meaning we're adding synthetic fertilizer like nitrate-based fertilizer, and which adding a lot of oxidative stress, because nitrogen is most oxidized nitrogen. And when in wheat you form protein, which is most a desirable outcome for baking, for using it, and that protein, that amine group, is most reduced nitrogen, and you have to go through 7 different stages of oxidation, and it's extremely difficult for plants to handle. It's essentially is like giving people the sugar, and you get through that negative feedback loop. And once you get into that cycle, herbicides, fungicides, pesticides is being used to help the plant defend, because the plant itself is chronically ill. It cannot pursue its secondary metabolites, because those are not in the breeding target. When you're adding all those chemicals, you're naturally suppress those compounds or secondary metabolizing process in that equation. So as a result, wheat breeding can only the variety of wheat can only last 10 years or less before you have to breed the new varieties versus the
Wow.
heirloom variety. uh, One of the arid environment champion wheat, white snore wheat, which was introduced by the Spanish missionaries, uh, brought in from Mexico, well, across the globe, brought in from Mexico to Arizona, has been grown here for over 300 years. And think about the epigenetic change of that year after year after year as you save the seed, as you cross different year of the seed together, and that change is vast, is very, in my view, is as majestic as how life is supposed to be, or as little as how it endure its next generation to co-evolve with the changing environment. So that is very important. Now, going back to the secondary metabolites, why that is so important. The first example I want to give is vitamin C, ascorbic acid. It is Vitamin C is very well known in the research world right now as a primary metabolite in the plant. But there are so many different structures and bonding strengths. And one particular one is L-ascorbic acid. And there are very few research papers. There's still a debate when the structure change of ascorbic acid into L-ascorbic acid, it entering into a secondary metabolizing stage and actually it allow to bond is actually become conjugated, allow it to bond with other micronutrients. Now this is very important because if L-ascorbic acid is still in primary metabolism stage, it is very unstable. It will go back into other forms. But once it enter into a conjugated stage in the secondary metabolism cycle, when it adhere with micronutrient, not only it activate the micronutrient bioactivity as well as its own ascorbic acid bioavailability, and which is the most well known for human absorption because it's more bioactive than any other structure.
Yadi, what you're saying there is so impactful. I got to unpack it just a little bit because epigenetics means above genetics. It means our not our genes are changing, so not our entire DNA. Those guanine, adenosine, those nucleic acid sequences are changing. What's happening is how we express those through processes of transcription and translation. It's our body's ability to adapt really immediately to environment. And so what you're saying there, you're saying several things. One there, and I want to get on to that vitamin C thing because I love vitamin C, but I want to take it in a different route. Is that the push to quantity over quality? And you said you're a facilitator of growing life. But by pushing to quantity over quality, what we're doing is we're not facilitating life in the plant. We're facilitating illness, was your word. But we can't just leave it at the plant because as you correctly inserted, the animal, the cows, the goats, and the other aspects of that cycle are just as important as the plants. So in essence, we are through this industrialization, the push to quantity, demand, as you said it, we are facilitating illness through our agricultural practices. I mean, that's what I hear. That's what I see in our patients. That's how I see cancer demographics changing. People go, well, cancer is a disease of aged, old people, 70s, 80s. It's at the end of life. But what we see right now is cancer, and I think it's a vital sign. I think it's a vital sign, not just of our environment, of our bodies, but of our culture. But it goes back to agriculture. I don't think we can disconnect those. And I think vitamin C is a beautiful point there, Yadi, because there was a 2022 article. Check out the show notes for the article there. And I'm actually going to have her on my podcast. Yadi, you'd love her. She's a gastroenterologist. People think about vitamin C and they think IV vitamin C for cancer treatment as an integrative treatment. IV vitamin C has been shown to augment chemotherapy in pancreatic cancer, just for an example. That's in human trials. But what's really interesting is we know that the gut microbiome is changing. That is the microbiota, the bacteria, the archaea, the everything that's within our gut. It's changing, and it plays such a critical role to our immune system and metabolism, because we know that the microbiome in the jejunum, the small intestine, actually has a bigger metabolic impact than that in the colon, where it has a bigger immunologic impact. But vitamin C, this 2022 paper showed that the deficiency of vitamin C in the diet is probably connected to a deficiency and decline in Bifidobacterium taxa in the gut microbiome. Now, why is that important? Because we know that people with cancer almost invariably are deficient in Bifidobacterium. So now that's an association, but that is a very, very tight, I believe, association between that soil lower, not seeding life, but illness, and it's impacting our gut microbiome, and then it's seeding Yadi disease. And what do you think about that? Because I'm always trying to tell people that, look, no, what you eat does impact your disease risk. It does impact your healing, and it does impact what your oncologist or what your cancer doctor is doing to treat you. You cannot disconnect the two. They are connected.
Yeah, I think I go back to the word holistic, right? It's never linear. And when we're looking at this, we have looking at from the system approach and system thinking, and how do we activate. Back then, our first conversation is about education, and here's my take. But I want to address. I think when you talk about plants, animals, soil, and all these part of the intervals in the ecosystem, and we'll also talk about soil. Soil is the host of all this life. And the reason I'm looking at the plants is going back to the scientific principle. The first scientific principle is observation. And it's easily I can observe with minimal cost. And when I observe the animals, that is already secondary because they consume plants, particularly those herbivores and ruminants. They consume plants. So the root cause is, or root observation, I would say, is still on the plant level, whether it's the roots or it's above ground, and it changes. And a lot of these things, I'm I'm trying to kind of continue learn in a way for myself is at the foundational level. I think most books or search words I've done on internet or books I've opened are those introduction level books. Introduction of inorganic chemistry, introduction of organic chemistry, and introduction of cellular biology. And physics 1, physics 2, and all those books. Those are my most frequent go-to sources because we have known as science as so basic, so foundationally, and that's if we're thinking about building a building, we have a very solid foundation there. Everything adding on there is an extra, and but we always have to go making sure taking care of our foundation in order to have a good living space, and or in this case in order to continuously educate ourselves. And in terms of the structure of vitamin C in this case is really going back to the thermodynamic stability, solubility, and the bonding strength, and all those things. And that's what we supposed to learn in organic chemistry, but we never were introduced in a way is instructor will tell you, by the way, think about it as vitamin C in plants or vitamin C in human body. And I think if we can activate those critical thinking in our education system, students going to learn from an entirely different way and from how they digest. And then probably a lot of people will change their career path to pursue something that is alternatively more exciting for them. So I think education is key there. Now, I want to go back to vitamin C topic at the very foundational level. Um, just to kind of add on a little bit is in our food system and food industry, a lot of product you go out there, you see they include, yeah, vitamin C in there, but they don't really, they tell you is ascorbic acid, but they don't tell you what type of ascorbic acid. Now, from the synthetic chemistry perspective, there is also a D type ascorbic acid, which is used as a preservative, is not bioactive. It's the mirroring of the L ascorbic acid. Now think about when we read the food labels, that's a different hot mess, I think. And you read, yeah, there's vitamin C, ascorbic acid, but we don't know if that's a plant extracted L type ascorbic acid or the synthetic D type ascorbic acid. Then we're either diving into a bioactive vitamin into human body or we're consuming preservative, and that is very dangerous. I think those are very basic level fundamental science why we learn this physical science at the foundational level. It is not to say one thing is right or wrong, is to continue to improve ourselves using those foundations to understand how it is important to guide ourselves to make a positive contribution to our human health, to our community, to others we care, or to the ecosystem as a whole. So I think it's very
Great.
important.
Yeah, that's I we had talked beforehand a couple of weeks ago before this podcast, and I knew this was going to be great, and I knew Yadi was going to bring some context to this conversation that was beyond what I was imagining. But this conversation about the vitamin C is a twist here, as I mentioned beforehand, Yadi. That sometimes I have all these notes and we just take it and let it run because it goes back to that illness versus life. you know, the bioactive vitamin C is bioactive diverse. It is facilitating life. But the non bioactive, the preservative is, as you said a word earlier, hollow. It is not providing any contribution or facilitation to life. In fact, I would say because it's not bioactive, it detracts, and so it's detracting from life. And so I believe that then, with other detractions and other aspects, it facilitates illness. And so and this soil vitamin C plant connection, and then transferring that to animals that we eat, all of that, but then it's changing our gut microbiome. So then it's changing our epigenetics. I mean, this truly is a deeper connection than I could have imagined. So, for example, we know in research that our gut microbiome today is not what it was 50 to 100 years ago. They're different. So when researchers look at the gut microbiome today and try to define it, what's normal, I don't think we know what that is anymore. Can you define soil as what's normal anymore? The work that you've done at Oat Farm Flats, are you helping to facilitate the soil and farming and plants back to something that would be historically considered more normal, or is that even definable?
Um, in my word of work, I'd never try to define things
Okay.
because define, in my view, is trying to depict something that to my personal viewpoint versus actually, in a way, draw the context and then I think setting certain principles and rank them what is at the current stage of my learning capacity and my understanding, what outcome I trying to seek. And so I'm gonna base on those goal and outcome, tailored outcomes and goals, and to go back to emphasize what can I do to make it better. And maybe 5 years from now, when we enter into a different stage, I will have to set new goals and new outcomes. So it's an evolving process. It's never, in my view, a set deal to say this is what it has to be, and this is what our target, end goal, and that end goal should change over time as it enter into a different stage. Um, and so going back on I think one part I think I do want to emphasize, we talk about local food consider compared to imported particular produce. I think one part I'd say is, in addition to focus on local food and know your grower is very important. Know who you are supporting is very important. And this is diving into a different can of worm. I think we'll dive into that. I think on the market side, how do we actually help farmers to get there? I think there's ways, pathways in the local food system to achieve that food sovereignty. But I think another part where I think I want to extend a little bit on this metabolizing process and think in a different way using vitamin K as an example. Um, One you mentioned, like, now that I'm a father of three and you have kids and everybody do that. And a lot of time from the parents' perspective, what we want the most is how do we take care of our next generation so that they can grow up with the best they can for the being that we are the guardian. Um, and of course there is a lot of vaccination and it has to be poked into infant. That's by itself poking a needle to infant. It's just a harsh reality sometimes. And vitamin K is important because right now K1, vitamin K1 particularly, most doctors suggest, yeah, we need to have that for infants to prevent the blood clog, right? So in the infant. So but if we are really thinking about K1, it's actually derived from the plants, particularly the leafy green, and it's a secondary metabolite. Going back is why know your source is important, and think about the woman health and the pregnant woman in connection with the infant and that hormonal change, that cellular connection. And it's very well understood a lot of nutrition that can pass through from the goat liquid, the breast milk, to the infant. Um, so in this case, I think the K1, if we focus on really talking about food is medicine, focus on women's health at the prenatal, at the pregnancy before deliver the infant, allowing the female to sequester leafy green that has potential to sequester those vitamin K1, I think that will change a lot of ways we think about whether we should poke that infant. That's in my view. I think diving into a human side is become important. There's so many right now. We're in a stage where we're educating people in a way we want to advance the level, want to reach out to that the next innovation technology. How do we teach people in the right way? But if we just understand the foundation of how K1 is being produced in plants at the basic level of the plant metabolism, and how do we actually facilitate that, allow the soil, plants, and the nutrient cycling all incorporate together, then we're actually addressing that issue in a much, much holistic way that is not only ecologically sound, but on the human side, I think is so critical. And we are actually really focusing on the preventative care in that sense rather than curing.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I knew this. I knew this was going to be a good conversation. But what you're presenting here is two perfect examples of how food is medicine, or because of its hollowness, you need medicine from a conventional standpoint. Okay, you're using vitamin C and vitamin K and connecting them from the soil to the plant to the human, and the presence or lack thereof, and thus the need for medication. So people go, well, I want to be well. I don't want a vaccination. I don't want medicine. Well, it really comes down to what you've described there in the components of the vitamin C and vitamin K. And of course, there's many other things and the metabolites. And I love that because, I talk about hormone metabolites all the time. People think of hormones individuals and they forget that, well, some breakdown products of that process, metabolism, they are more bioactive or less bioactive, more contributing to biodiversity, bioactivity, and more, or maybe more contributing to disease. And you're describing that connection in a way I couldn't have possibly even imagined between the vitamin K1 and vitamin C, and how that impacts the need for a vaccine, how that impacts the gut microbiome, and how all of that impacts disease. I mean, that's incredible. So what you're describing there, Yadi, is you're actually describing that you said you're a grower of life. So that implies that soil is life. Because when most people look at soil, they look at it as just decomposed material. But you're implying that soil is life because you grow life in plants from it that is then transferred up or not. Is that correct? Is soil life?
Uh, it's soil. Going back, is soil is the host of life.
Hmm.
So within soil, there are many organisms, just like human, breathe and intake oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. And that's why we talk about this one. I think about is how do we address carbon cycle rather than carbon sequestration. I use that word often very carefully as part of the education, but also as part of the integrity of the work. In everything we do, is if we only address carbon sink, sequestration, and we're talking about suffocating life. We're not allowing those CO2 to come out, and that is in my view, is a yes, we're addressing the global net emission issue, but we're doing a disservice to other ecological communities that are not part of the human, still need these as a exchange process. So I think as a host, when we take care of a host, then we take care of the life and the well-being. And just like when we take care of our house and we keep up the maintenance, and we can live very comfortably, and we don't have bug infestation, we don't have leaky water, we don't have mold damage, all those things. It's equally for soil, is how do we take care of it? How do we maintain it? How do we get that to the next mile, after mile? How can we get that truck drive for 5,000 miles, 500,000 miles instead of at 100,000 miles and have to be total? And this it's kind of coming back is the decision making on the high level, in on the personal level, on the community level, is how do we make that decision making that we can translate all those things, taking care of car, taking care of house, and taking care of soil. There's no fundamental differences. It's the perspective how we look at it.
Well, so your words are perfect. Um, you said that you are a there are vital signs. So as a physician, people come in, I check their blood pressure, I check their heart rate, I check their temperature. These are vital signs that assess systemic systems that are vital to life. Okay. And if we then transfer that back through those series of compartmentalized environments that work to the benefit of the whole, that is that carbon cycle, from the animals to the crops to the roots to the soil, then there's vital signs for the soil. But then, as you said, there is the component of actually then integrating a healing prescription, but one that starts there and works up. So one that, as you said, facilitates life as a teacher, because you are, as a healer of the land, and facilitator of life with plants, which I love that, which you are, what would be your vital signs of those aspects? And you could use some individually or just focus in on the soil or the plants. But then what would be your prescription? And we'll wrap up with that. What would be your prescription for changing that?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. One we think about as a integrative physician, and a lot of physicians I've worked with and on the integrated world is focusing on not to cure but to heal in processes, right? It's a sequential steps, and for as you reach new target, new goal, new outcome, and then you advance from there. And equally in the ecological setting, I use the word as a biological succession. And in holistic management, Alan Savory described as the community dynamic. Um, so those are they're very much the same. And if we're looking at a bare land in the arid environment that is um, fragile, there's a bear and there's very limited of water holding capacity, and there's very limited life on there. And we often the first sign we see is the weeds pop up, is the brassica group, is the pigweeds, all those things pop up. And that's the first sign of those things. When the land is wanting to take care of itself, it will call for it, say, hey, I need something to help me hold my soil together and to grow some microbes in the root zone. That's why living roots is important in those six principles in the arid environment. It's not only it transport water up and down, equally it grow the microbial communities using roots as a host and expand from there. And over time, when you have brassica group and pigweeds, all those things start to fade away, new species will come out. So soil has the ability to hold seed banks. Now clover seed can last for 1,000+ years before it decide to I want to germinate, and when the environmental condition is right. So imagine we have a soil that we cannot see what seed bank is in there, but the soil itself knows a call for different species to support it as an organism, as the biological succession, meaning a transition, as when the soil have these functional group, either bacterial for fungal for archaea, all those microbiology species balance out, and the soil will call for other seeds to start waking up, and that's called biological succession. That's called the um, the dynamic of the community. Is essentially is how do we bring the native, how do we bring the most supporting system back onto this whole ecosystem approach to allow things to thrive, to allow life to thrive, to have that abundancy. We can also use biodiversity as a word, not just reflect on the above ground, but it starts fundamentally from the below ground.
Wow. Um, this has been a nerdy discussion, I'll tell you that, but it's been so fascinating. So, my take home here, Yadi, is that to heal not just our bodies now, and to heal for our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren and for generations to come, we have to focus on the biological succession, the generational impact going back through that carbon cycle. And I think you've very eloquently said that, and I think you've tapped into some of your culture of origin, your history, and I think that's provided a lot of perspective and visualization that I out of America would never have been able to make that connection. So I want to thank you for your time, Yadi. How can people learn more about you and maybe the work that you're doing, and maybe even connect with your work? Where can they find you in the world of the internet?
Wow, that's a great question. I think we've talked about this. I'm not anti social media, but I don't use social media as a platform. In my personal approach, um, uh, as you said, Oatman Farms. As far as now, I'm still contracting and then helping steward the land, helping the owners on that. So I think that's one of the best source to know what we grow, and also um, development of regenerative yields cooperative, short in dry co-op, is perfect match with our climate in Arizona. And that's something we put a lot of effort into a community work. I'm a visual person. I like three dimension, um, except metaverse. So I want to be real. I think the most impact I think I can make is to my family, my community, people I can see eye to eye, and I know that I give the best I can. I have no regret, and then people are improving on their skill set, livelihood as a whole. I think that's at the foundational level is as a human being what I can do the best with the 24 hours per day that I have. So I think it's rooted in the foundation. That's always my principle. I think if I don't have a good foundation, kind of be everywhere, I don't think I could do nearly amount of work that I have did right now or learned right now as a person, and that growing capacity is really happening in real life in interaction in sticking with that everybody shoulder by shoulder, eye to eye. And that's probably is one of the best thing I would recommend everybody to do is to go rooted in your foundation, rooted in your community, taking care of people you see, you react and act every single day has the most impact, in my view, on our society.
Well, making it real and living it real every day, Yadi. This has been a great discussion. Oatmanfarms.com is where you can really find a lot of his work. There's actually a paper published there where their research project and their data is actually where you can see the actual real data work of what they're doing to what I would say is heal the land. Of course, you can find me at Prescribe. That's pre-scribe.com. We're on all the social media. I'm trying to get Yadi on social media, but it doesn't sound like I'm going to be too successful there. But we'll have clips there. So he's going to be there, but kind of not sort of. So, of course, dr.goodyear, that's Instagram. At Dr. Goodyear, that's X. And you'll find us on YouTube as well. Go to our website, pre-scribe.com, where you can actually sign up for our newsletter, because we want to provide these platforms not as an alternative to reality that Yadi was talking about, local community, but to actually be a facilitator to connect you to where you can. I think connect to local community and people of like-minded. And so if you ever have an opportunity to connect with Yadi, it's an opportunity you don't want to miss. Yadi, thank you again for joining us on this podcast. And it has been a pleasure. And I look forward to getting to know you better as a person, not just as a scientist, because I think what makes you such a good scientist is that background of the individual that you are. So thank you again for joining us, taking time out of your day to, I think, really take some deep dives that are, I think it's going to change perspective. And thank you very much.
Very much appreciate your invite and then allow me to share some voice, and I hope that's helpful. And then I'm very much eager to have this continued conversation with you.
Absolutely. 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 Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye bye.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.